Hello, thanks for tuning in. It's October 23rd, 2024. And for this short video, I'm going to concentrate on something which caught my attention recently, Edgar Cayce. I read this book that came out in 1997 by K. Paul Johnson called Edgar Cayce in Context just a couple weeks ago. Um, K. Paul Johnson had written a book about Madame Blavatsky and her masters and the sources of her ancient wisdom, which he traced down to rather prosaic sources that don't necessarily have to be masters. But that was in this book here that came out in 1994, The Masters Revealed. Um, Johnson's interesting in that he was a theosophist for quite some time. Then he off and on was part of the Association for Research and Enlightenment, and in other words, a follower of Edgar Cayce. Lately, according to the online record, he's become immersed, at least and 15 years ago, into the Brotherhood of Light, which is about a 90-year-old organization that revived interest in astrology and Hermeticism and tried to establish it as a real, quote, science, unquote. So back to Edgar Cayce. So who was he? Well, you can look him up online. He's one of the more prolific psychics and seers who went into trance and did thousands of readings for people about their health, about their future, about their past lives, about relationship to Atlantis. He did some readings about ancient Lemuria, Atlantis, and uh, continents and cultures. Many of his predictions were wrong. Many of his so-called healing recommendations were kind of iffy and maybe influenced by his clients who talked to him about everything from theosophy to New Thought to osteopathy to chiropractic to different kinds of alternative medicine during his time of these readings. So, yeah, he died in 1945. He was born around 1877. He was known to have illnesses when he was young. He had experienced hypnosis. In one case, he became a clairvoyant in trance for a hypnotist that was doing medical readings for people using Cayce, and that began his career, which formed the organization around him, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, which exists today. I've been there, I've seen it. It's kind of a new age center. It has that feel and sells a lot of those books that you find in alternative and occult bookstores, along with other stuff. Um, that's interesting about the Cayce Foundation and is that they don't reject the scientific views of Cayce. They introduce you to them, and you can find that kind of information there in their website and so forth. But for the most part, their money is made by people that believe in this stuff. And there's a lot of people that have formed cults that have used Cayce's information or regurgitate it in some way in their own occult writings, like Ruth Montgomery reflected Cayce's idea of the end of the world, a new age coming in the late 90s. Um, Ramtha, Jay-Z Knight is influenced quite a bit by Cayce. I had a case down in Australia in the late 80s where someone flew me down to talk to his wife who'd been into a lot of occult. And into the cult I was in, the Church Universal and Triumphant, my cult leader. And then Elizabeth Prophet had a personal relationship with this woman in Australia, and it was bothering her husband, who was very wealthy, one of the wealthiest men in Australia, and he was a skeptic about this stuff. And so he flew me down to talk to his wife. She was very angry when she met me. But we did talk, and we got along okay, after things got started. And what I found out after getting there, which I didn't know before I arrived, with her main interest was Edgar Cayce. And that's what got her into the Church Universal and Triumphant, because there's so many similarities in what Cayce was talking about and what this new cult, which was formed in the late 50s, was talking about. So I had to address Edgar Cayce with her, and luckily I had some information with me and knew about him. And by deconstructing and dismissing Cayce's credibility, I was able to undermine the Church Universal and Triumphant's credibility with her, and she broke away from the movement to the satisfaction of her husband. So we had a, quote, successful exit counseling in about 3-4 days down there in Australia. But going back to Cayce, why is he so attractive to these weird cults and fringe beliefs and astrologers and people that believe in past lives and all of that? Well, because he kind of believed in them himself. He basically didn't push it. He was never a charismatic cult leader in the sense of being an absolutist about his beliefs. But the people around him certainly protected his ideas and his readings and tend to promote that angle of his ideas that we call the New Age movement, uh, in which he falls very deeply. So, what's making him so popular even today, even though he made an awful lot of mistakes and a lot of his healings, could be explained in many other ways besides the ways that people believe he affected them. So I think it goes back to this tension between the old religions and the idea that we have psychic powers and the march of modern science, which continues to test, come up with new ideas and new ways of testing reality, and will dismiss many religious beliefs. For instance, the idea of the flat earth, the idea of a young earth, and show through credible science that the world is older than 6,000 years old or 4,000 years old, as some fundamentalists believe. But going past that, I think a lot of this does go back in our modern times to Blavatsky again, and her Theosophical Society. In the 1880s, 1880 to 1884, she wrote, allegedly, she wrote these things called the Mahatma letters to a student of Theosophy, A.P. Sinnott in England. And these were collected in something called the Mahatma letters here, which came out in the early 20th century. This is K.H., the Blavatsky's master, Kuthumi, who wrote most of these Mahatma letters to A.P. Sinnott, including Moria and a character named Jwa. So in here, there's this interesting letter by Kuthumi to Sinnott, which Blavatsky herself wrote, basically, if you want to look at Occam's razor and get rid of all the occult bullshit that goes around this kind of stuff. But let's look at what K.H. or Kuthumi said to Sinnott here. He goes in the beginning, he goes, "No wonder you find it cloudy, for it was never meant for the uninitiated reader. Eliphas Levi studied from the Rosicrucian manuscripts." And anyway, Eliphas Levi, Louis Constant, was a cultist that influenced Blavatsky quite a bit and her teachings in Theosophy. So the letter goes on, if you really want to know what we're talking about, become a master like we are, an adept of the occult sciences, you're going to have to do certain things, so you shouldn't be questioning us. And some of the things they recommend is the fasting, meditation, chastity of thought, work, and deed, silence for certain periods, and all of this. And if you do that for many years, maybe you'll be initiated in some soul way or spiritual way into this great white brotherhood of wisdom. Apparently, Cayce, because he was so flawed, wasn't properly initiated, and therefore his things were, his predictions and his medical readings were flawed to a great extent, although he got some hits, and some people claimed that they were right on. So At the end, toward the end of this letter to Sinnott, he says, "Our laws are as immutable as those of nature." Now, Cayce talked about the law sometimes as if this law existed, this immutable God designer who does everything perfectly. And if we could only tap into that, we would also be able to manipulate reality and do things perfectly. So he says, "Our laws are as immutable as those of nature, and they were known to man in eternity before this strutting gamecock, modern science, was hatched. We build our philosophy upon experiment and deduction." So Blavatsky's claiming here that the occult sciences, if applied properly by a pure mind and a pure soul, will work perfectly. And I think that's the attraction to Cayce, is that he was tapping into some of that. And if you follow that kind of inner world that you can access through trance or through some kind of occult technique or through ayahuasca or whatever, that you will draw down the perfection of the mind of God, kind of like Christian scientists believe they can do, and people will get healed, and perfect information about your new experiment will be revealed to you all of a sudden, whatever. So by calling modern science a strutting gamecock, there's a put down by the occultist, by Blavatsky, of fundamentalist science or basic science. And I find that also in K. Paul Johnson's book, because he does uh, quote what these scientists like from, or skeptics from the Skeptical Society, people like James Randi, who wrote a book called Flim Flam, which dismissed Cayce altogether as being at all worthwhile. Um, Johnson calls these fundamentalists skeptics, and kind of dismisses them as maybe not understanding the value of Cayce. And he tries to preserve some of that value in his book. I think he is similar to Gary Lachman in his writing. Gary Lachman wrote a whole series of books on the occult and occultists, about Blavatsky, about Rudolf Steiner, and about any number of things related to that. And he tends to lean toward finding value in all of that. I think Johnson does too. I tend to lean toward uh, putting up red flags around all this, because I see cultic rabbit holes that people fall into very easily by giving people like Cayce any kind of credibility that they really had uh, great psychic powers of any kind. So it's really up to you how to see it, but I prefer to strut around with this gamecock science, which corrects itself over time, whereas with something like the occult scientists, they are very resistant to correction, especially um, from critics like me. But in any case, if you read this book or anything on Cayce, especially this book, I think you will find enough skeptical information to make up your own mind about whether he has value for you or not. So I'm going to leave it at that. I think I just wanted to look at Cayce a little bit here, because he's been so influential in what we call the New Age and the occult sciences, and whatever. And this book by Johnson explains why. Where he got his information, which was usually through an oral transmission from people he knew around him, who were osteopaths, chiropractors, New Thought people, theosophists, and people that would tend to believe in that kind of thing, that came to him for healings. So I'll leave it at that. I'll leave some links for you to research it further. Thank you for listening.